Usually when we talk about a chemistry lab, there's this expectation of, well, just absolute precision. You mix chemical A and chemical B in these exact, like, highly monitored ratios, and you get a very predictable reaction.
Yeah, it's a closed system.
Exactly. It's clean, it's engineered.
You're measuring mass down to the decimal point. Because, I mean, if you don't, the experiment either fails completely or literally blows up in your face.
Right. But then you step into the world of home baking, and suddenly that precision just seems to vanish.
Oh, totally.
You see people eyeballing handfuls of powder, pouring liquids until it just sort of, like, looks right.
Relying on vibes.
Relying almost entirely on vibes, yeah. But underneath that cozy kitchen aesthetic, baking is an unforgiving scientific discipline. So today, we are stripping away the quaint idea of baking as an art form, and we are looking at it purely as applied chemistry, right down to the elemental building blocks.
Which is, frankly, exactly how we need to approach it. Because if you look at the fundamental science of ingredients, I mean, baking is a rigid mathematical system. Every single input dictates a very specific chemical output.
And the consequences are, well, they're immediate. Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at the source notes we have for this deep dive, specifically this Unit 4 on ingredient science, it highlights the brutal consequences of inaccuracy right away.
Yeah.
Like, the data is very clear. If you use too much flour, you don't just get a slightly different cake.
Yeah.
You trigger a chemical failure.
Right, which results in a fundamentally dry product.
Exactly. And too little flour, and your product is completely flat.
It's an absolute cascade of cause and effect.
Yeah, and it extends to every ingredient. Like, too much sugar causes burning. Too little sugar yields something pale and just tasteless. It is a tightrope walk.
It really is.
And that tightrope walk starts with the very first thing we do in the kitchen, which is measuring. We are so used to baking by volume, right? Like using standard cups.
Yeah, the classic measuring cup.
Right. But looking at the actual unit conversion data from the text, volume is incredibly deceiving.
It's the primary reason home baking fails.
Wait, really?
Oh, absolutely, because volume measures the space something takes up, right?
Yep.
It doesn't measure how much actual matter is in that space.
Okay, yeah.
So to put some hard numbers to it from our source, 1 cup of flour is 120 grams,
Okay.
but 1 cup of sugar is 200 grams.
Oh, wow. That is a perfect illustration. You take a measuring cup, you fill it with flour, and then you fill another one of the exact same size with sugar. They take up the exact same physical space on your counter, but the sugar is nearly double the weight.
It's significantly denser, yeah.
Right.
Precisely. And if you just, plunge a measuring cup into a bag of flour, depending on how heavily you pack it, you might be scooping 80 grams or you might be scooping 150 grams.
Right, because of the air pockets and stuff.
Exactly. You are introducing massive variables into a closed chemical system. But a gram is a unit of math. It never changes.
It's a constant.
Right. To control the chemistry, you have to control the mass. And the source text shows that even on the micro level, the framework is rigid. A tablespoon is exactly 15 milliliters.
Okay.
And a teaspoon is exactly 5 milliliters.
So once we commit to measuring by mass, and, accept that we are running a chemistry experiment, we need to categorize our chemicals.
Yes. Map out the board.
Right. If we map out the board here, our source lists distinct ingredient classes. We have dry ingredients.
Which is your flour, sugar, salt, and cocoa.
Right. Then wet ingredients, milk, eggs, and, interestingly, melted butter. Then fats, which lists solid butter, margarine, and oil. And finally, leaveners, which are baking powder, baking soda, and yeast.
The fact that butter shifts categories based on its physical state,
Yeah.
that's wild.
Yeah.
Because solid butter acts as a fat, but melted butter acts as a wet ingredient. It tells you immediately how much thermodynamics and physical state actually matter here.
Right. Heat fundamentally changes the ingredient's job. But to really understand this matrix, let's look at them one by one. We have to start at the absolute foundation, I think. The architectural scaffolding of the entire operation, which is flour.
Yeah. Without flour, you don't have a baked good. You just have a hot, sweet puddle.
A puddle, exactly.
Flour's primary functions, according to the text, are providing that structure, building a gluten network, and determining texture.
Okay, let's explore that gluten network.
Yeah.
Because flour sitting in a bag isn't a network.
No, it's just dust.
It's inert dust.
Yeah.
So if flour is the steel scaffolding of a building, right, it provides the shape. But the powder itself isn't the scaffolding. It has to be constructed.
Right. It has potential energy, essentially. It hasn't been activated yet.
Right. And this is where the physical methods come in from the text. If you look at the fundamental techniques in the source, kneading is defined specifically as a push and fold method. That requires serious kinetic energy. So my question is that physical push and fold motion the literal construction work for that scaffolding? Like, are my hands doing the welding?
What's fascinating here is they absolutely are.
Really?
Yeah. Kneading specifically develops the gluten in bread. And gluten, as the source defines it, is simply a protein in the flour that creates elasticity.
So by pushing and folding the dough over and over, we are physically manipulating microscopic protein.
You are stretching them. You're forcing them to align.
Okay.
So when the flour is dry in the bag, those proteins are just loose and disconnected. But the moment you add a wet ingredient and you begin applying the kinetic energy of that cushion fold kneading method, you are linking them together. You create this continuous elastic web throughout the dough.
Which totally explains why bread dough can stretch out so thin without tearing.
Exactly.
It's a web trapping the air and gases inside.
Right. And that elasticity dictates everything about your final texture. Which is why the source lists distinct types of flour. We have all-purpose, bread flour, and cake flour.
So they aren't just arbitrary labels.
No.
They represent different structural capacities. Like you are tailoring your structural engineering to the specific dessert.
Yes. If I'm making a crusty loaf of bread, I need a massive, highly elastic web to trap all the gas produced by the yeast. So I use bread flour, which has the right protein levels for that elasticity.
But if you applied that same strong scaffolding to a delicate pastry, you'd end up with a dessert that you have to, like, aggressively chew.
Right. Nobody wants a chewy cake.
Exactly. For a delicate texture, you actively want a weaker network. So you use cake flour.
Exactly.
The logic is beautiful. But, a purely gluten-based scaffolding is rigid and dry. A loaf made only of heavy flour structure is just a tasteless brick.
Yeah, pretty much.
So to make it edible, to give it that irresistible quality, we have to interrupt that structure. We need to inject moisture and color. Which brings us to the great multitasker of the kitchen.
Sugar.
Sugar. Here's where it gets really interesting, because most people view sugar in a single dimension.
Right. It makes things sweet.
Exactly. But in baking chemistry, sweetness is just one part of it. The source lists 4 distinct functions for sugar. So beyond sweetness, it is responsible for browning, specifically caramelization, moisture retention, and surprisingly, it aids fermentation.
And if we connect this to the accuracy warnings from the introduction, this is huge.
How so?
Well, if you skimp on sugar, you don't just lose sweetness. Your bake becomes pale because it lacks that browning and caramelization function. And it becomes dry because, as the text states, sugar is responsible for moisture retention. It literally holds on to the moisture in the batter during the baking process.
So if I used to think, a cake is too sweet, I'll just cut the sugar in half.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Based on this chemistry, if I reduce the sugar, I am actively guaranteeing a dry, pale cake.
You're removing its ability to retain moisture. Exactly.
That is wild. And that fourth function, aiding fermentation, that connects right back to our ingredient classes from earlier.
The leaveners.
Yes, yeast. Yeast was listed under leaveners. So the sugar isn't just sweetening the dough, it is aiding the fermentation of the yeast.
It's a completely interdependent system.
It really is. And just like we have different flours for different structures, the notes list different types of sugar: granulated, castor, brown, and icing sugar.
Right, all performing these complex chemical tasks depending on what you need them to do.
Okay, so we have our structural flour scaffolding, and we have our sugar retaining moisture and aiding fermentation. But for true texture, like softness and richness, we need to introduce fats.
Fats are crucial. The source lists butter, margarine, oil, and shortening.
Okay.
And their core functions are providing texture, specifically softness, flavor, moisture, and crucially helping leavening.
Okay, I have to pause on that last one.
I thought you might.
When we talk about leavening, right, getting that airy upward lift in a bake, how on earth does a dense block of fat, like butter, help something rise?
It sounds completely counterintuitive.
It feels like throwing a lead weight into a hot air balloon. How does fat help it rise?
Well, the methodology is the chemistry here. To understand why butter makes a cake rise, we have to look at the mixing method associated with it in the source.
Which is the creaming method.
Yes, beating butter and sugar together until light and fluffy. The text explicitly notes this results in soft cakes and cookies.
Okay, so beating butter and sugar until light and fluffy.
That physical action, that beating, is what matters. You are using the sugar to physically carve tiny pockets of air into the fat.
Ah, so you're trapping air inside the butter.
Exactly. You are mechanically forcing air into the fat. So it's not the heavy fat itself that is rising. The fat is just capturing the air that you manually beat into it.
And then the heat of the oven expands that trapped air and the whole thing lifts.
Precisely. That's how a fat helps leavening.
That completely flips how I look at baking methods. It's not just an instruction, it's chemistry.
It really is.
And to prove how vital that specific method is, we can look at another method in the text, the rubbing in method.
Oh, this is the perfect contrast.
Right. Because the text says in the rubbing in method, butter is rubbed directly into the flour.
Yes.
And the resulting bakes are completely different. It specifically lists shortbread, scones, and crumb toppings.
Right. Things that are dense, crumbly, and flaky. Not airy cakes.
Exactly.
Because you've changed the sequence of the chemistry. By rubbing the fat directly into the flour, you are physically coating the flour in fat.
Oh, I see.
So when you add wet ingredients later, they can't fully interact with the flour to form that strong gluten network we talked about earlier. The structure is sabotaged.
It's waterproofed.
Basically, yes. The gluten strands remain very short. You get a crumbly texture instead of an elastic one.
Wow. Okay, so we have our dry flour trying to form structure. We have our sugar retaining moisture. We have our fats either creamed to trap air or rubbed in to coat the flour. It is a bowl full of conflicting agendas right now.
It's chaos in there.
Total chaos.
Right.
We need something to bridge these gaps, to bind this mix together and trap all that air we just created. Enter the egg.
The egg is the ultimate bridge. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the egg is the Swiss Army knife ingredient.
It really is. Looking at the list of functions here, binding, emulsifying, moisture, leavening, which it notes as trapped air, and browning.
It does absolutely everything.
It really does. But let's break down those first two, binding and emulsifying.
Yeah, so emulsifying means forcing ingredients that usually hate each other, like fats and water, to play nice.
Because normally oil and water just separate.
Exactly. But the egg acts as a chemical bridge between them, keeping the batter smooth and unified.
Okay, and binding.
Binding is what holds the flour and sugar together once it cooks. It gives it that final structural integrity.
So it's locking everything in place.
Right.
But the text also points out that eggs are responsible for leavening, specifically trapped air. And again, this comes down to the methods.
The methods dictate everything.
Right. The text lists two specific methods that rely heavily on eggs. First, the whisking method, where whisking eggs and sugar increases air, which it says is essential for sponge cakes.
Right. You are vigorously beating the eggs to trap massive amounts of air in their proteins.
Okay. And then we have the second method, the folding method. Can you explain this one? Because the text says it's for delicate items like chiffon and muffins.
Yeah, folding is crucial. When you whisk all that air into the eggs, you create a very fragile structure. If you just dump your heavy flour into that airy egg mixture and stir it aggressively, you'll pop all the air bubbles.
You lose all your leavening.
Exactly. So folding is defined as gentle mixing. It's specifically designed to keep the batter airy. You carefully incorporate the flour without crushing the delicate structure you just built.
Wow. So what does this all mean?
Well,
If we step back, baking is a precise negotiation between structure from the flour, moisture and color from the sugar, softness from the fats, and binding from the eggs.
yeah, that's exactly it.
And manipulating how they combine, whether creaming, whisking, kneading, rubbing in, or folding, dictates the entire outcome.
It does. And, you know, it leaves you with a really provocative thought if you look at the source text's rigid rules.
Yeah.
If baking is truly just an exact mathematical balance of these specific functions, you know, structure, moisture, softness, and binding,
Yeah.
does that mean every baked good in existence, from a heavy loaf of bread to an airy chiffon cake, could theoretically be plotted on a single mathematical graph?
Oh, wow.
Just by slightly shifting the weight and the mixing method of these four core ingredients.
That is fascinating, like an entire baking matrix on one graph.
Exactly.
I enthusiastically agree with that theory. It totally changes how you see a recipe. So the next time you bake, think of your kitchen as a laboratory. Respect the chemistry.
Measure your ingredients.
Yes, use a scale. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the elemental building blocks of baking.
It's been great.
Until next time, happy experimenting.